Hey, my name is Jeff Vollmer, and today I'm going to talk a little bit about setting your bandsaw up to make puzzle boxes. We're going to start with the brand new Pegas saw, which I'm having a bit of an affair with right now. The Pegas uses a little smaller blade than you're used to. Here is your 1/8" blade next to a Pegas 0.009 by 1.5 millimeter. This is their medium-sized blade. They get smaller down to 5 millimeter, and they go up to 0.014. So, how do we set up our saw? Our first task is to put our blade on. Now, once our blade is on, and you have it centered on your wheel, the centering is done by this knob right here. When you screw it in, the blade comes out. When you screw it out, the blade comes in. So it's kind of reverse of what you think it would be. So the first thing we have to do is to level our table to the blade. We have to have a 90-degree angle between these two pieces. Now this is done by loosening the trunnion bolts underneath the saw, one on each side, rotating the table back and forth till you get it to the level position. Once you get it to the level position, you bring up the leveling bolt in the back and tighten the nut so it stays in place. This allows you to always go back to level without having to work and find it again. Now, once those bolts are tightened down nice and tight, and we are 90 degrees, the next step is to set our thrust bearings. And we have a bearing on top, and we have a bearing on bottom, identical. Now, the idea on these bearings is to hold the blade in place. They have a small groove in them. So the blade will stay right inside this bearing. And the bearing can slide in and out. So not only do you have to square the blade to the table one way, but you have to square it this way with the thrust bearings. Now the next question is, how much pressure should be on these thrust bearings? Almost none is the answer. When the saw is running, you should be able to touch that bearing and it should not turn or create friction on the blade. That blade should just kiss those bearings. If there's any more pressure than that on it, you're going to wear out your blades much, much faster. So remember, just kissing. You should touch the bearing and the bearing will not turn when the blade is moving. Now, once we have set up our blade both directions, we must adjust the tension. Now, tension is adjusted on the back of the saw by this knob way up here. Now, if you look down to where it's setting here, the spring right now is on top of the second notch. Okay, on a Pegas saw, they do not mark where the blade should be because it's going to be different with each blade. And you're going to have to play with this a little bit, ladies and gentlemen. It's really important. I have found that that's a good starting place. Now, how do we know if our blade is too loose? Well, if our blade is too loose, when we cut through a piece of wood, this should be straight. But if the blade is too loose, sometimes we'll find that there's actually a curve inside the wood. The blade is bent inside it. It's twisted a little bit, following the grain usually. I call it bellying. I don't know what the true term of it is, but that tells you your blade is too loose. So when you're making a puzzle box, you're making these tight turns. If it's fatter in the middle, or thinner in the middle than it is at the ends, then your blade needs to be tightened a wee bit more. It's always better to be a little bit looser than a little bit tighter. So work your way up. Start at the point where I've shown you here on the saw. Now, if you're using a bigger blade like the 014, you might go to the third notch. If you're using the 005, you start at the first notch. So, very important right there. Now, I found these blades to last a long time, quite durable. And, of course, they cut like butter. They're the most amazing thing I've ever seen in my life. Now, having said that, we're going to talk a little bit about the Delta, which I also have. I've got 4 bandsaws, and I have been making a living with bandsaws for 30 years. So, I do know a wee bit about them, I guess. Most everything's the same on the Delta as it is on the Pegas, except for the Delta has actual guides that you must adjust. And once again, your leveling is exactly the same as it is on the Pegas, but these guides, just like the thrust bearing here, should just kiss the blade. You can see I can freely turn these bearings. Now, if you don't have a bearing set on your saw, you'll probably have cool blocks or blocks that go in, whatever you want to call them. Again, those should come up very close to the blade, but never actually rub on the blade. Now, where the Pegas does not have a tightening guide on the back of it, the Delta does have a tightening guide on the back of it, and I have found that that tightening guide, and it tells you what size blade, where to set the saw. That's where you start. And I found that most saws have that same tightening guide on them. So start at the point where it tells you. Then go from there and experiment a little bit. And remember, different blades are going to require different tightening, more or less finesse. But the important thing is to remember to square your blade in both directions to the table. If you don't do this, you will cut tapers. And I guarantee they'll go the way you don't want them to go, and they won't go the way you want them. So, set your saw up, experiment with it. If you're still cutting tapers, you're still out of adjustment somewhere. Sometimes this can take a bit of time to finesse it in the exact place you want it to be. Now, I'm fortunate enough to have 4 bandsaws. Again, excuse me. So, each one of my saws is pretty much dedicated to a blade. I don't have to reset it. When a blade breaks, I just put a new blade on. One saw's got a big blade, one saw's got a medium blade, one saw's got an 1/8" blade, and then the Pegas has the wee blades. So I'd like to thank you all for taking time to listen to me. Feel free to ask me questions. I'll try to answer as best I can. Thanks, and have a happy Thanksgiving.